Hello, my name is David Weiss, and I've been invited to share a bit about a fundraiser I've been running under the fiscal sponsorship of your congregation. I want to thank Pastor Brad in particular for inviting me to Zoom in to be with you for this presentation. Just a quick word about myself before I begin. I'm an itinerant public theologian, which is just a fancy way of saying that I have a pair of graduate degrees in theology. And after teaching college and doing other things for a couple of decades, I've set aside my day job and have chosen simply to think out loud about God in plain language in the midst of our daily lives and the pressing issues that challenge our faith. And of course, to hope that I at least occasionally get paid for that. And sometimes I do. I blog at davidrweiss.com, where I do what I call community-supported theology. It's sort of like a farm-based CSA, community-supported agriculture, where you get a box of farm-fresh vegetables each week. In my case, you get theology, more or less weekly, delivered right to your inbox. And every now and then, just as with a CSA, you'll get something in your box that you don't know quite what to do with, or even something you found downright disagreeable. On the other hand, you also sometimes get new things that catch you off guard and offer you a taste of something sublime. Who knows? Maybe this presentation will work out to be something like that. Anyway, if you're interested in learning more about my work, you'll find it at my blog, which is just my name, davidrweiss.com. Now I'll share my screen and we'll start the presentation. There we go. So here's my title, Getting a Truck for a Song, a gospel story about feeding the hungry in a hospital in Uganda, told backwards. I'm really excited to tell you this story, but I have to warn you, even though I'm on tape, I'm probably going to get choked up a couple times because the wonder in this tale runs so deep in my life. I sometimes think God is like an origami artist, making folds in our lives that occasionally make it possible for a mere two-dimensional piece of paper to unexpectedly transform into a three-dimensional work of art. We sometimes use highfalutin words like miracle to describe these moments, but most of the time, when you look back, you can begin to see all the creases that made this particular moment possible. You just didn't know the design that was being worked out all along. Well, in Thornton Wilder's play Our Town, the main character Emily returns to Earth for a single day after dying. It's a profound theatrical moment when she gets a glimpse of all the origami folds as they're happening, and she can see where it all leads. She famously and frantically asks the stage manager, "Do any human beings ever realize life while they live it? Every minute." It's as though she sees the weight of each crease made in our lives. The stage manager responds to her question in what I imagine is a tone of resignation and empathetic disappointment. "No," he says, "saints and poets maybe. They do, sometimes." Well, I'm inviting you into an Emily-style moment this morning, a grand and holy pause to stop and see the creases that brought us to the truck I'm going to tell you about. According to the Apostle Paul, all of us who gather together in Jesus' name are saints. So I'm hoping that while we're gathered today, we might pause and see, even if just barely, the folds of grace that crisscross our lives. You know, if you unfold an origami creation carefully, you can get it all the way back to a flat piece of paper. And if you trace over the creases, you can see in stark relief all the folds that were needed to make the final result possible. Next week, my friend Moses will go shopping in Uganda, If he were to post about it on Facebook, his status might read something like this: looking to buy a reliable extended cab pickup to transport people and porridge to feed hungry patients at a local hospital. Limited funds, hoping to get the truck for a song, God willing. Now, I could tell you the story of that truck from the beginning, but this is a gospel story, best told backwards. That truck, when it's finally found and purchased, will indeed carry porridge, bananas, and the people who serve them across the city of Mbale in eastern Uganda. The porridge will be in 10 5-gallon jerry cans, served up in 16-ounce mugs along with a banana to every patient in the maternity ward, the women's ward, and the children's ward at the Mbale Regional Hospital. It's a busy hospital because it serves an entire region. Besides the beds for inpatients, it hosts regular outpatient clinics on certain days each week, like pediatric clinics for diabetes and for vision, where children and their parents often walk miles to get care before returning home, walking miles again back the same day. Now, you might be wondering if the hospital food in Uganda is so bad that they'd rather eat porridge and bananas. No, it's that in Uganda, as in many developing countries, hospitals provide medical care, but not meals. So when you go into the hospital, you have to make arrangements for family or friends to bring you meals each day. And if you don't have family or friends able to do this, you just don't eat for the time you're there, which is not great, especially if you're taking medication on an empty stomach, or if you're a nursing mother or a kid, in which case a cup of porridge and a banana can seem like a feast. Moses says the new mothers and the young children in particular beam when they eat, as if Jesus himself were the host of the meal. Truth is, the folks behind the meal program, the members of the Dorcas Star Mission, they seem to imagine that Jesus is the one being fed. Who knows? Maybe they're both right. They feed the mothers and kids first. On clinic days with walk-in clinics, they try to bring extra to feed as many of the walk-in children patients as they can before they turn around to walk home. On good days, there's leftovers to feed other patients. On really good days, even some of the staff get a mug of porridge, because some of them work all day without eating either. This is already happening in Uganda without a truck. How can that be? Well, meet the boda boda. These are Ugandan taxi cabs. They're everywhere, often 3 to a lane, darting left and right, scrapping to get their current passenger delivered as quickly as possible so they can move on to their next fare. Notoriously unsafe, but reasonably cheap. And in a country where poverty is plentiful, cheap is golden. And because relatively few people own vehicles, boda bodas are a lifeline, even if a rather precarious one. So right now, half a dozen boda bodas are used every day, 5 days a week, to transport those 50 gallons of porridge in jerry cans and several hundred bananas and the handful of volunteers who serve the meal. But a truck would really help. That's why Moses is going shopping for one. They make the porridge from scratch, cornmeal and sugar and water. I suppose it's not unlike our cream of wheat or cream of rice cereals. Of course, they cook theirs in a big pot and over an open fire, and gallons at a time. But that's just detail. They've been doing this since mid-April. By now, the hospital provides them a room to set up and when they arrive so they can serve up the porridge. And afterwards, they clean things up and store the utensils there until the next day, when they serve another couple hundred patients all over again. And they've been doing that for more than 100 days now. Who does this? Who is this they? Well, a handful are just volunteers, people with time on their hands and compassion in their hearts. They take turns doing the cooking and the feeding and the cleaning, but the brains that figures out the logistics, the love that sustains and motivates, the mystery that inspired this program, these things belong to the Dorcas Star Mission, born of a simple faith fellowship of just 8 persons, a house church of sorts. They'd been meeting regularly for several years now, simply to support one another in their shared faith, in navigating the challenges of daily life from work to family by referencing Bible passages, sharing prayers, joining in fellowship. But last April, as the pandemic was spreading across the globe, this small circle of followers of Jesus, ordinary folks like you and me, none of them wealthy or well-connected, felt pressed in their hearts, invited by their faith, called by the Spirit, creased by a paper-folding God, if you like, to do something more. So they started feeding patients at the hospital. The need was so great that before long, they were feeding 400 meals a day, mostly out of their own pockets. And that's when Moses came to me looking for a truck. That was May 2020. But why would Moses come to me? Why would he think I could help fold an origami truck to carry very real porridge, bananas, and people? I suppose because this wouldn't be the first time our lives were creased in ways that took surprising shape. Most recently, because I'm telling this tale backwards, in spring 2019, an 8-year-old girl flew by herself from Uganda to Germany to be reunited with her mother, who had fled Uganda 5 years earlier. I helped raise $4,000 through a GoFundMe to buy her plane ticket for that trip. And actually, I'd raised all that money 4 years earlier. See, it's no small thing to get a child out of a country that her mother fled from for her life. It took Moses years and years and years of making one tiny origami fold here and another one there, perhaps a bribe or two along the way as well. But in March 2019, Chloe, against all odds, made it to Germany and back to her mother. So after that, why wouldn't Moses ask me for a truck? Moving backward a bit further, 2018 was a particularly hard year for Moses. Having been a pretty daring ally to LGBT persons for a number of years had cost him dearly. And that summer, his car was vandalized and his home in Mbale, where he lived with his wife and 4 children, was broken into. He'd already lost much of his income as a freelance project manager due to his association with LGBT persons. 2 of his 3 school-age children were sent home from school because he could only pay the modest tuition for the oldest one. So I asked my family members to chip in. We sent Moses enough money to repair his car, replace the front door on his home, and get his kids back into school. It wasn't really all that much money, but looking back on it, it was another crease in the sacred paper of our lives. Now we go back to November 2016. It's a Sunday, November 13th. My wife, my son and daughter-in-law, my daughter and her son, the 6 of us are sitting down to eat Sunday dinner. I get a phone notification of a Facebook message. Now, it's rude to check Facebook at the dinner table. It irks me when my kids do that. But I see it's from Moses on the other side of the world, so I open it and read it, and I am stunned. When I try to share it with the others at the table, I'm reduced to tears. He writes to tell me that 12 days earlier, on November 1st, Moses and his wife Sarah have welcomed their 4th child, and they named him David in my honor. As Moses put it, as a testament to our enduring friendship. When someone has creased your life like that, how do you say no when they ask for help buying a truck? Still earlier, from 2014 to mid-2016, the congregation I was attending at the time sent modest quarterly support payments to the Rainbow Christian Fellowship, a community of 20 or so LGBT persons and allies based there in Mbale. Moses had become their leader, a sort of unofficial deacon to the community, several years earlier after their original leader was killed in a tragic accident. During this same time window, in the summer of 2015, I started the fundraiser that raised the money to fly Chloe to Germany 4 years later. It turned out that most of that original money got spent on the ensuing legal maneuvers, so when Moses finally got clearance to buy the plane ticket in 2019, we made one last direct appeal to a single person who covered the outstanding funds needed to get Chloe on the plane and back to her mother. The year before, fall of 2014, I ran my first fundraiser at Moses' request to fly his dear friend Agnes, Chloe's mother, to Germany, where she eventually made a successful application to be considered for asylum. Although Agnes was heterosexual herself, like Moses, she was a courageous ally to the LGBT community in Uganda. As a small-time seller of crafts, really a one-person street vendor, she used her movements to serve as a courier of documents, evidence of human rights abuses, and other important communications between high-level LGBT activists and organizations. When her role was revealed, her life was put in jeopardy, and she made the very difficult decision to flee for her own safety while leaving her daughter in her grandmother's care. In one of those origami moves that makes something out of nothing, I not only raised $3,500 from 50 different donors, I also serendipitously connected Agnes with a chance friend I'd made earlier through Lutherans Concern North America. Marcus was a gay Lutheran who lived in Germany, and he was not only willing to drive a couple hours on short notice to meet Agnes at the airport, he also hosted her on her arrival for a couple weeks and connected her to an immigrant rights organization that guided her through the asylum process in Germany. Now, we're 7 years back as the folds go, 2013. My church at the time has decided to send a person to Uganda to meet in person with LGBT Christians and allies working for acceptance, welcome, and justice in Uganda, in hopes of establishing some relationship and building longer-term partnership. As for me, I am a homebody. My international travel up to this point has included a couple short day trips across the border into Canada and one week-long high school trip to Mexico 30 years earlier. I am not excited to go, but I am a writer, and the church wants to send someone who can, quote unquote, bring the experience back to the congregation. So they want to send me. And because I am a writer, I cannot protest like the biblical Moses that I am slow of tongue. But I make clear that I am anxious of foot and would be happy if they selected someone else. I am as successful in my reluctance as that earlier Moses was. And before long, I am getting my passport and a bevy of immunization shots and new luggage. And I'm anxiously trying to map my plans for spending time and getting around in a country further away from anything I've ever known. That's when I reach out to Moses at Pastor Brad's suggestion. Among the many jobs he's juggled, Moses has worked as a fixer, an on-the-ground guide and jack of all trades for visiting journalists and film crews. Because he speaks at least 3 Ugandan tribal languages, as well as near perfect English, and he knows the country and the cultures and the rules for filming, and he knows where to get equipment repaired without getting ripped off, and he knows people everywhere, and he knows which police to bribe as the cost of doing business and which ones you don't dare try to bribe. Because of all these things, he's a priceless resource for someone coming in from outside the country. He was both a fixer and a translator for Call Me Kuchu, an award-winning 2012 documentary that put faces and stories to the lives of LGBT persons in Uganda. So, in 2013, I hired Moses to be my driver for the 2 weeks I would be in Uganda. As a bonus, he was known and trusted by multiple members of the LGBT community there, including Bishop Christopher Senyanho, one of the very few church leaders willing to be public in their support of LGBT persons. The bishop had actually been defrocked by the conservative Ugandan Anglican Church for his stance and had his pension revoked. But he kept using the title because, as he said, it's how my people know me, and I continue to serve as their shepherd. Anyway, for 2 weeks, Moses was my driver, my translator, my liaison to a community that would otherwise have had no reason to trust me. He daily held my life in his hands. And on the 2 occasions he wasn't available to do so, he arranged for a trusted friend of his to meet me and accompany me in his stead. That friend was Agnes, who held me safely in her hands when Moses could not. And on one of those occasions, her hands were also holding then 2-year-old Chloe. So it was my great honor, my holy privilege, to later play a role in shuttling both of them in turn to safety in Germany. While in Uganda, I was mostly in Kampala. One day I stopped with Moses to see his closet of an apartment, the tiny room he stayed in when working on assignments there in the capital city. Humble abode is understatement. I also made one trip with Moses about 150 miles east to Mbale, his hometown. There, in a large hotel courtyard that provided more discretion than a local coffee shop would, I met several members of the Rainbow Christian Fellowship, including Aisha, whose name will appear again a few folds backward yet. Aisha had never even heard of me before this day, but she was awed and teary-eyed to meet me because I had some shirt-tail connection to people back in America that had been grace to her. Also, while in Mbale, I met 3 of Moses' children, though I never got to meet his wife, Sarah. But I did visit his simple concrete block home, 4 bare rooms and an outdoor toilet. One room in particular left me in speechless awe. We'll get to that next. Now, we're all the way back to 2011. I just heard Bishop Christopher speak here in the Twin Cities about the plight of LGBT persons in Uganda. For several years earlier, I'd been a national trainer and the Twin Cities coordinator for the Reconciling in Christ program. By 2011, my contributions to that work were no longer formal, but no less fervent. In February, shortly after the brutal murder of David Cato in January, he was the leading activist profiled in Call Me Kuchu and a personal friend of Moses. I was moved, inspired, enfolded in the spirit, you might say, to write a hymn text, an anthem for Uganda, titled Preserve Uganda's Future Hope. It poured my grief and passion and faith into a powerful, poignant text. As Pride approached that summer, likely in May of 2011, I shared that hymn with my email circle of RIC-related pastors. Pastor Brad, was one of the recipients of that hymn text. He, in turn, shared it with someone he knew but had never met personally, a young man in Uganda named Moses. A week later, that man reached out to me by email to introduce himself and thank me on behalf of the Rainbow Christian Fellowship for a song I'd written that had been sent his way. It was the first email I'd ever received from Africa that didn't come from a wealthy Nigerian prince or the widow of a rich diplomat hoping to leave her fortune to me. It was my first contact with Moses. Moses taught my song to the Rainbow Christian Fellowship, and on October 19th, 2011, the Rainbow Christian Fellowship sang my anthem for Uganda in that bare room with a concrete floor in Moses' home. That's why when I stood there about 18 months later, I couldn't speak, because the echo of my words on the lips of saints unknown to me was still so heavy in that air. That anthem, my friends, is the song that Moses will buy this truck with. Because had that song not linked our lives, none of these other folds would have been possible. But we're not quite back to the beginning yet. There are two last scenes to relate. I didn't know Pastor Brad well in 2011, but we knew of each other through our common vision of a church that welcomes and affirms LGBT persons in the fullness of their being and their calling. I knew of Pastor Brad in particular because of his association with the Naming Project, a summer camp for LGBT youth that he helped found in 2004. The project took its name from the name calling that so many queer youth must endure, some of whom don't endure it but die as a result of it. But at this summer camp, these youth are grounded in faith and in their being named as beloved children of God. Well, all the way back in 2006, 2 years after founding the Naming Project, and while he was pastor at St. Luke Presbyterian, a person in Uganda reached out to Brad regarding the Naming Project and the desire of a small circle of persons based in Mbale to better support the spiritual needs of LGBT youth and young adults in their faith community. That contact came from Chris, Moses' predecessor with the Rainbow Christian Fellowship. It opened a relationship that continues to this day with several members at St. Luke's who still support educational opportunities, particularly for those who have lost familial support because of their sexuality. And one of the first persons who received that support was Aisha, the young woman who tearfully greeted me in that hotel courtyard in 2013 as though I were the personal ambassador of all the goodness she had received. Today, Aisha is among the founders of the Dorcas Star Mission, paying forward into Mbale the same grace she received from Minnesota more than a decade ago. And that overture from Chris and the Rainbow Fellowship in 2006 became the fold in the paper that built the origami bridge that led Brad to share my song with Moses 5 years later in 2011. Finally, now we get to the first fold. What brought Brad to the Naming Project? That's not really my story to tell, but I can share this much since it's up on the Naming Project's website. Back in 1998, while serving as a hospital chaplain, he met a young woman whose anxiety over the seeming conflict between her family, her faith, and her sexuality had expressed itself in anorexia and bulimia. It was eating her alive. Around the same time, and at the same hospital, Brad met a gay teen in such torment because of the world's rejection of gayness that he contemplated suicide. These two queer kids fighting for life and faith and food became the first folds in a piece of paper, a living scripture now stretched across 22 years that led Brad to the ministry that connected him to the naming project, to Moses, and to my song. The song that formed a friendship so enduring that when I say Moses is looking to buy a truck for a song, that's about as much truth as a single sentence can bear without bursting into flame. Today, there are 8 persons in Mbale, including Moses and Aisha, members of the Dorcas Star Mission, whose lives have been faithfully folded into God's work, feeding the hungry. When they approached me last spring about help in buying a truck, after all these other folds, who was I to say no? So I reached out to Pastor Brad to seek his help in providing a fiscal sponsorship for the fundraising. This was especially critical because we had at least one major benefactor for whom the chance to make a tax-deductible gift was essential. But it also raised the credibility of the campaign to have it sponsored by a church rather than me as an individual. So now you too at St. Michael's have been folded into the gracious reach of God that runs between Minnesota and Mbale, Uganda. Let's return for just a moment to Emily on the stage in our town. She still exclaims, "Do human beings ever realize life while they live it? Every minute." And the stage manager still responds, "No. Saints and poets, maybe, they do some." Well, you are gathered saints. And perhaps in this moment you do feel at least a bit the way all these origami folds of grace crisscross our lives, yours as well as mine. I hope so. Thanks for letting me tell you about the Dorcas Star Mission and their silly, sacred belief that they just might get a good truck for just a song. Well, this has been a gospel story about feeding the hungry in a hospital in Uganda, told backwards. But it's time now to move forward. Time for Moses to go truck shopping with whatever money is available. I'd be remiss not to mention that a few final gifts would help him shop for a little more reliable truck. In origami, as in the mysterious workings of grace, every crease counts. And who knows, the next crease just might be yours.